Welcome, welcome, welcome. You're listening to the Ask Brien radio show on KHTS 1220 and 98.1 FM. Well, as all of our loyal listeners know, we've been doing this for over 8 years, and some of you may have been depressed because I was out for the last 2 weeks exploring the world, which is also educational, which is one of the big E's on the Ask Brien show. But getting back to reality, getting back to the show, we have a very good show today, as typically we do. We have our longest-serving co-host, Mr. Alex Grossman, and we have a guest today that's been on the show once or twice before, but hasn't been on in a while, and we want to explore with him what's been going on. But, everybody always wants to know, especially people who have never watched or listened to our show, because you can watch it on Facebook Live or YouTube, but people want to always understand why Ask Brien is spelled with E. So we have somebody that's really good on explaining to people why Brien is spelled with an E, why we're not the O'Briens from Ireland, why we're not at the O'Brien pub, because that's the only way people spell Brien with an E. And everybody's first name, proper name, is B-R-I-N or B-R-Y-N, and we want to know why there's an E in Brien. So, Alex, please explain some of the reasons why we have an E in Brien.
Well, Peter, I'll start with some of my favorites. And the first one is, of course, entrepreneurship, because Ask Brien would be nothing without entrepreneurs. Would you agree to that?
I would agree to that, but when you say entrepreneurship, you're like, what is, are we like an aircraft carrier off the coast of Russia? What's going on there with the ship?
It's more like a cruise ship. We're more like a cruise ship. We cruise around. Yeah. That's our entrepreneurship. But, the one thing it does bring is a lot of energy, which you would know nothing about, right? Nothing about energy.
Well, that's because I'm so excited!
I love that E. That brings a little bit more enthusiasm to this show, doesn't it?
Yes, but, you missed the most important part of our show and how our show could not be done without who?
An engineer?
Oh, thank you.
As a fellow engineer, that should have been your first call as well, Alex.
Well, yeah, but I'm a train engineer, so what do I know about engines and trains?
Oh,
hey.
Oh. I think you're driving the caboose there, but go ahead.
Well, you look at this and you go, the one nice thing about everything that we do is we educate. And I think that's probably the most important thing. And our guest today is going to really help us with that. So tell me about the education that Ask Brien does.
Well, we educate by helping out people every week by learning something new. You can learn something new on a specific category, whether or not it's how to raise money for a company, how to count your inventory, which Alex is an expert in counting inventory. He has a whole staff of people that are experts. And by the way, what is an expert? Well, an expert, according to Ask Brien, we say you need 5 years doing the same thing in order to accommodate an expertise. And why? Because you need 10,000 hours. Well, how do you get to 10,000 hours? Well, we presume there are 50 weeks in a year. Now, there are 52, but people do take time off. So we presume 50 weeks a year and 40 hours a week. Okay, that's 2,000 hours times 5 is 10,000 hours. But as an entrepreneur, no entrepreneur that I'm aware of can work 10,000 hours in 5 years. Why? Because they're working 60, 70, 80, some of even 100 hours a week just to try to do things. So they can become an expert a lot quicker. But what we mean by an expert is we mean something that has gone through a lot of the problems, a lot of the issues, a lot of the things, so that they have dealt with it before and they have learned and have educated themselves to really get a firm understanding of what they have. And it also includes experience, which is another one of the E's, that they are now experienced enough to handle the day-to-day issues. But without any further ado, A-D-I-E-U, love that word. Why? It only has one consonant. We do have a guest today. He's been on the show a couple of times, but hasn't been here in a couple of years. So we want to fill in and get some more information about him. But we also want to know a little bit about his background. His name is Bill Soller. And Bill, so the first question we have for you, just some people may have not listened to the show before. Just give a quick couple-minute background about who you are and your experience, and then we'll go into some interviewing questions.
Well, thank you very much, Peter and Alex. Appreciate it. It's great to be back on the show. So my background is it started my second year in college. A roommate of mine was actually delivering bread, of all things, baked goods. And at the time, I'm going to date myself here, but at the time, he was making about $800 a week, which was a fortune in college, and I'm sure we can all relate to that. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, there's something to this. So I actually ended up working at it was a French bread distribution company, and I actually was the person that drove the van and delivered the bread to whatever restaurants or things like that, and did quite well. Went from there. I left college at that point. I was making actually more than my roommate did, and realized that there was a business to be had there, and realized that I could purchase distribution areas, which I did. Started out with one area, purchased many, many more, and was bitten by the proverbial entrepreneurial bug at that point, and have been an entrepreneur ever since, primarily in the food space, but I've done trading in commodities, East Asia, in the U.S., obviously, and Latin and South America. I've started a number of companies in the food space. Most recently, I'm the founder of a company called Albany Farms, which is a ramen noodle manufacturer based in Belfouche, South Dakota, which produces ramen noodles. From our perspective, it's the best. If you're going to eat ramen, it's the best in the world, because why are we in Belfouche in South Dakota? Because that's the wheat belt, and that's some, if not the best flour in the world, which ramen is wheat-based. So we're real happy with where we're at. So been a long-time entrepreneur. I've had some successes. I've had, like everybody else, some significant failures. There's some things where after, having an exit from a business, I learned things that I could have done different. I've learned things that I did right. It's always a journey of education and awareness and segueing to where your business is best positioned to find success.
So when you say distributorship, you basically there's a brand out there or a company out there that has their own product, and you're actually taking that product and pushing it out. How do you know if you can answer this? Is a little tricky question here. How is that different from a franchise, if you know?
Well, a franchise. I mean, first of all, everything is sales based, right? Everything is. I mean, the two people I'm on the phone with are an attorney and an engineer. So, but in that business, you're in sales as well. We all do it every single day. Entrepreneurship is just having a bit more ownership and responsibility behind that salesmanship. So, and from a franchise perspective, to answer your question, it's, you typically will purchase a location, franchising rights, something of that nature, whether it's an individual location or rights to a certain product or service. And you'll typically have an agreement where you'll pay certain amount of monies to have the right to either distribute, sell. For example, I was involved with Krispy Kreme Donuts. Krispy Kreme Donuts has franchises across the country. The final consumer might see it as Krispy Kreme, but to the franchisees, for example, in California, the southern half of the state is owned by one franchisee, and northern is somebody else, and it's different all across the country. So when you're an entrepreneur, it's more an individual thing, where every responsibility typically falls on your shoulders, good or bad. It's great on one hand. On the other, it takes a certain tenacity, a certain awareness, a certain ability to plan properly, with a business plan and idea and great follow through, good math skills. But it also takes a significant amount. The word I always use with people is grit. And grit's not necessarily a fancy or romantic word, but it's a word that really applies to entrepreneurs because there are many good days and unfortunately many, many difficult days.
Alex, you got a question?
Yeah, I do. So Bill, you raised some really interesting points, and I want to hit on two of them really, really quickly. The one is what Peter mentioned, franchise versus distribution, and then just pure entrepreneurship. The way I always tend to look at it, and this is for our audience to see where we all stand on that. The way I always look at it is if you go on your own, you're responsible for everything. So you own everything from A to Z, including all your branding, all your marketing, all your relationships with your vendors and your customers, and everything is on your shoulders, including all your finance. When you look at franchising, you basically still own that business like you're an entrepreneur, but now you're responsible to the franchise or to be able to sometimes buy their goods and report back to them and pay them a commission, a franchise fee, or a royalty, and you get the advantage of a lot of their marketing and their brand and a lot of their customer base. But you do a distribution or a distributorship, you kind of get the best of both worlds and the worst of both worlds, right? So you're given a territory that you manage, and you don't have to worry about 90% of that. You have to worry about generally, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but generally you worry about your customer base and satisfying your customer base, and you have a little more free time on your hands because even though you own that, you're not worried about all those other tasks. Is that the way you tend to look at this, or do you see it in a more granular area?
Perhaps a little more granular. I mean, in theory or in relevance in years past, I'd say it's spot on. I think a little bit has changed. I mean, for the most part, it's correct. I think the one thing that's changed is labor. And I think labor, even from a franchisee perspective, has really muddied the water. And for those of us that have had employees, it's always challenging, but it's become a very, very difficult thing pretty much wherever you're at. I've had employees across the country and the different things that I've done, and most recently in California and South Dakota, and I can say for certain that labor is a major, major issue. You swing from people that want to work from home, and maybe you're in a business where that's possible. Typically with a franchise business, it's probably not. So that's a challenge. You have people that are constantly leaving because the labor pool of skilled work is, or even semi-skilled work is dry, and they're always looking. They're always looking for that next opportunity. To give you an example, at our facility in South Dakota, we have line workers and we have semi-skilled, mechanics and things like that. Well, I've had a couple of people leave because they want to do the quote van life online, right, where they live out of the van.
Right.
And my age group, you hear about a van and you think about living in a van down by the river. But, nowadays it's become this exciting thing where, we're going to post online, all the things about that. So it's not just that. It's many, many different things. I mean, people just don't look at work. I'm speaking in it from a macro perspective, but people don't look at work the same way as it used to be. So I think it's more of a challenge, but I think the level between being being a franchisee versus an entrepreneur is much different, and that's where you're spot on. I mean, everything is on your shoulders from A to Z.
Wow. Yeah, the complication of having to deal with employees today and all of the issues around that definitely complicates it. And do you think it's easier so with distributorship, you're not worried about that so much. With a franchisee, it's difficult. Do you think it's easier under a franchise or easier as a sole entrepreneur, or it doesn't really matter?
Well, I think most entrepreneurs, there's exceptions to that, but don't have a huge number of employees, so they can perhaps do a little bit more due diligence and really find the right candidate. But, who you hire is whether you're a franchisee or otherwise, an entrepreneur, it's critical who you hire. I mean, we've all heard, or the three of us here, we've all known stories where people have failed who they decided to work with, who they brought in for key positions or important positions. So I think that's a huge part of the challenge. It's just different nowadays. It's just not that's just another problem that an entrepreneur or a franchisee has to deal with. I think franchisees have that problem as well. They might have support from a corporate level where they have people that help train and help try to guide them in hiring the right people, but it's still, I know a lot of franchisees, and it's problematic for them as well.
Great. Peter, did you want to jump into something there?
Yeah. So what is the number one skill that you need to have if you are a distributor to be successful?
Well, with what we do currently, we're manufacturers and distributors, and I think, what's key in all of it, it's just not easy. I think one of the things you need to do is have a like-minded person, somebody that kind of sees the vision or has the vision that you have, or at least a certain percentage of that. I've had a lot of people that I've hired because their resumes were quite impressive. And I quickly came to learn, boy, that was a mistake. There's some that work out, but I think sometimes it's the one-on-one, speaking to somebody and really being honest with yourself, and not just being impressed with where somebody worked or what their educational background is. Those are all indicators, and those are wonderful, but that's not the end of the story. I mean, I'll give an example. There was somebody in a similar space that was in sales that we brought in, and I thought, actually, they were a lot of experience in sales. They were a buyer in a category that we were in. I thought, boy, they know everything that they need to know. It was a complete disaster, and the reason being is the person was switching from job to job. They were really just trying to not work, and I didn't see that because I was so impressed with the skill set and the resume. But, if somebody's not going to work and they're not going to put, I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're a franchisee or an entrepreneur, you cannot be everywhere all the time. So if you don't have somebody you can rely on, and somebody that, from words that I use, that's in the trenches with you and gets things done when you're somewhere else on a project or a sales call or putting out other fires, if you don't have somebody that's like-minded, you're in trouble. So it's difficult.
So what is the one criteria when you're trying to hire your crew, your people, that you look for? I mean, a resume
is like-minded. Yeah, it's like-minded. It's somebody that you feel passion and energy from, somebody, one of the things that I always like to ask is what they would do with certain problems. And it's really interesting what kind of responses you'll get. It's great to say, the cookie cutter interview, you would ask certain questions. But I like to ask, what do you do if? What do you do if you're responsible for one of our lines? I mean, we have 2 600-foot-long production lines. And what do you do if there's a myriad of things that can go wrong? And what do you do when that happens? What do you do when the city says you can't get enough gas coming into your building to run your boiler? What do you do? Just all these different scenarios. And yeah, they're negative situations, but it's funny how you'll unearth how people think on their feet. And it's not exciting to me that somebody wants to be the VP of sales or wants to be the vice president or even the president of a company. That's not impressive to me. What's impressive to me is almost somebody that they just want to be part of the team. And they don't care if they have that position or not. They want to make this thing work. And I've got a couple of employees that are like that now, who I think the world of. And so I'll ask them, and I like it when people have answers where they think on their feet and think quickly and think outside the box. I don't have all the answers. Sometimes I like to hear from somebody, well, I like that idea, but what about this? I mean, I really do. I mean, Alex, you're an engineer, and you have, I'm sure, very creative, but you also have, some, very high knowledge skill set when it comes to, from a mechanical perspective. But there's times, where the word Mickey Mouse comes in to get you by, right? And And I like it when people do that, at least from our manufacturing perspective. At least I know they have the capability, and they're not going to say we don't have we don't have that spring for whatever, and we ordered it. It's going to be 2 or 3 days. Where somebody else will say, I can pull it off of one of our wrappers and bring it in. So I guess the answer to the question is somebody that responds to less than ideal situations is one of my key criteria.
Well, we got to take a quick break. Listen to the Ask Brien Radio Show on KHTS 1220 and 98.1 FM. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to the Ask Brien Radio Show on KHTS 1220 and 98.1 FM. Like no other station in the world. All right. Alex, you had some questions. You said, Peter, you asked the wrong one, so now I get to ask the wrong one. So go to it, pal.
Exactly. So it was really interesting. You know, I was listening you talk about that fit with employees and how, you know, that can really make the day or break the day. And one thing you mentioned about good days and bad days, and we all have those. And I think a lot of our listening audience, they're entrepreneurs, and you know, they feel just like I do. You know, you get out there and you go, I'm going to take on the world, and you know, today's going to be the day, and then boom, you get into the first thing in the morning, you just get hit with something that just floors you. Whether it's an employee saying, you know, I decided that I'm going to take the day off because I need an emotional day, or I can't get it done, or a customer comes in, or a supplier doesn't supply what you need. How do you handle that? What do you do to handle those bad days and good days, and how do you define them? What's a good day and what's a bad day?
Well, you know, actually, Alex, the experience that you have is bleeding through in this question, because it's probably the most difficult thing that I've come across. There's lots of difficulties, but certainly understanding how to deal with and how to take advantage of good and bad days. So a good day for me is from a manufacturing perspective, is that the day starts out in a good place, that boilers and heat exchangers are working properly, that employees show up, and that lines aren't running into any extreme challenges, and that we're producing and packing at a good rate, and there's good communication within the company, and that's one of the good days, which is probably less than 20% of the time, and the vast majority of the time there are some sort of challenges or fires or frustrations. I think the key thing in that is, the good days, I think that we all need to, I try to take advantage of them and maximize the benefit from them, whether that's from a production standpoint, a sales standpoint, aligning with banks or lenders or vendors, employees working, well and working in tandem, working independently. You take advantage of those days and try to extract the most that you can, knowing I always believe in depositing into your personal bank account. And so as an entrepreneur, I believe that you deposit from a psychological perspective, deposit into your personal bank account when you have the positive days and realize, man, I can do this. This is the right thing to do. This is something that I can pull this off. I don't care what it is. You really can. And having that to cover or to handle the days where everything is wrong or most things are wrong, or some days where things aren't necessarily wrong, but in your mind they are, because it's the Bukowski wrote, what was it, The Broken Shoelace, right? Where it's not the major events that happen, it's that little thing that puts you over the edge. Well, there's lots of those when you're an entrepreneur, and the listeners that are entrepreneurs, they'll know what I'm referring to. And so, those are the tough times. Those are the times that really get you. And I think the word grit comes into play for me a lot, because a lot of people in my life have come to me and say, how do you do it? How do you handle it? Because they're familiar with a lot of challenges that I've had in business. And, a lot of times it's tenacity or grit, but a lot of times it's just getting through it. There's not a fancy word for it. It's letting the emotions work their way through and finding that energy, that ability to continue. And I seem to find a way to do it, virtually every day. I have horrible moments. I have moments where there's a lot of things I don't like because the business is so overwhelming. But I have seen countless people that have done incredibly well because they were tenacious. They found ways to get through those valleys that are very significant. And I think the three of us on this in this interview, I think we've all experienced that, and certainly that's something that I strive for every day, is to get through those challenging moments and take advantage of the good ones.
Yeah, I think it's a fair way to put it, and I think it's also, you were talking about your employees, and they have bad days too, and you're there for them, and they're there for you, and I think helping them to get past those bad days is also a big part of the job as an entrepreneur. It's not just you; it's like a family, right? You're responsible. You're the responsible person for that family, whether it's your family or
right.
it's your company. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people have to just take on as an entrepreneur. One of the things
right.
you mentioned to me in the past, and I'm going to bring it up a little because I want you to clarify it a little. You had talked about how maybe you're just not cut out for it. Maybe you realize, hey, I'm an entrepreneur and I just can't take the pressure. What do you do there? Do you just quit, or do you get help, or how do you manage that?
Well, yeah, that's another key point. I think a lot of people they have this enchantment with being an entrepreneur. A lot of people get tired of working for, quote, the man, or the challenges that go on, the office politics and all that other stuff that goes on, or not making enough money, or not having vacation time. I mean, it's tantalizing to a lot of people. But if you drive around any city, certainly LA, probably at the top of the list, I mean, you'll see clothing stores, restaurants, all kinds of storefronts that seem to be closing every 3 or 4 months. And you're like, how did that happen? Well, I walk by or drive by those things and I think, oh my gosh, the places that have made it a year and a half, and all the money that's been burnt. I mean, it's millions of dollars typically to launch a restaurant at a minute. And, you realize early on, they're not designed for it. They don't open properly. They're always out of product. Sometimes you need to know that you're not cut out for something. And it's not just the idea that, hey, I have a restaurant and I don't see any Mexican food restaurants that have organic food in the area. That's one idea. That's only one component. You'd better be pretty good at a business plan, pretty good at managing money, and incredibly good from a labor perspective. But and again, it's the tenaciousness. People that work in restaurants. When I was a kid, I worked in a store. I owned a store with my father, and we would go to the produce market at 2:00 in the morning. And I thought, well, I'm young and strong. I can do this. This is a piece of cake. Well, guess what? I'd pick up produce in the morning at 2 in the morning, and then this is very early. I might have been 15 or 16. And then, maybe 11:30 in the morning, I'm completely wiped out. And I've got another 6 or 7 hours to keep the store open. And then inventory everything. And then, whatever, all that stuff. So, it took all that I had, even as a kid, to keep that going. You really have to think these things through. And I think some people really aren't able to do it. Maybe their lives don't allow that. Maybe they just have very busy personal schedules. I mean, if you're an entrepreneur, a lot of things you have to say no to. And unfortunately, that's virtually everything. Virtually everything. So a lot of times you'll be somewhere you don't want to be and feel like, man, am I doing the right thing? Or you'll put hours in that you wouldn't normally. You'll miss events that you think, well, I can't do that. But then again, if I go, I can't do my business. I mean, a lot of things that you have to do, then that's real challenging. I do it. I'm not saying that that's always been positive. I try to create the balance, but it's taken me a long, long time to get to that point. So I think for certain people, if they feel overwhelmed early on, and if they're not able or willing to find help, and that help comes in and makes a difference, I think they really have to take a long, hard look at what they're doing and try to save their sanity and whatever monies they have left, and maybe look at something else.
Well, we got to take a quick break. We have to take a quick break. You're listening to the Ask Brien Radio Show on KHTS 1220 and 98.1 FM. And now a word from our sponsor, Legal Steps.
And the Ask Brien show wants to say thank you to their sponsor, LegalSteps.com. It's spelled LegalStepz with a Z.com. A lot of great things about LegalSteps.com. First of all, it's quite affordable. If you're in the position where you want to start your own business, certainly there are other methods that you can use. You can hire an attorney, but that's expensive. You can maybe look up some books, head online, start researching things on your own, but you're only going to get so far. For instance, if you have a book, certainly it's cheaper to do that, but then you have to kind of figure out how to do it on your own. What I love about Legal Steps is that if you can't figure it out, they will do it for you. They, by the way, being experts and attorneys who have over 30 years experience. So you know that you're in good hands. You know that you're not just working with someone who is just trying to, cash your check. They have your best interest in mind, and they will do it at an affordable rate. Classes are under $150 each. So again, like I mentioned, certainly go get a book, but now you're on your own. This way, with LegalSteps.com, you are able to literally follow along. You have it on your computer screen. You can have maybe another laptop, even a workbook, take notes, that type of thing. And you're watching someone walk you through each and every step. Here, this is what you fill out for this little spot right here. Make sure you dot your I's, cross your T's, that sort of thing. So they're really holding your hand through this experience. All courses reviewed by those attorneys that I mentioned. And you can look into registering a trademark, forming an S corporation, an LLC. It took me about, I'd say, just under 2 hours to take the course from start to finish. It was really easy. And by the end, I felt so much more confident that if I were interested in starting my own business, super easy. It could not be more simple. The other thing that I love, by the way, too, I mentioned the workbook. You can download a workbook, take notes, highlight, scratch out, erase, that type of thing. So you have the digital version and then the actual physical version. Go to LegalSteps.com and work at your own pace. LegalStepz, that's with a Z.com.
Well, thank you very much for our sponsor. You listen to the Ask Brien radio show on KHTS 1220 and 98.1 FM. So, Bill, we have about 4 minutes before we're going to be taking our next break. And so the question is, distributorships, franchising, running a business, all this stuff you're talking about costs a lot of money. Not everybody is born with $10 million in the bank to take it out and start a company, right? So how do you do it when you have no money?
We're not all born with $10 million in our pocket. Is that what you're saying, Peter?
Yeah, not everyone's like you.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. I think, depending on the business, any business, you really need to be well-funded. If you're, mowing lawns and you have one lawnmower and you can't, I'm not in that business, but if you, don't have edgers or trimmers or in areas where you can't use, anything with motors and stuff like that, you have to have equipment. You have to have maybe the ability to get in a local paper and advertise, or you need to hire help, or, you don't realize quarterly taxes that you need to pay them. There's so many things that go into it. So you need to be well-funded. I don't recommend to anybody that they get started in a business and they don't have the needed capital. Something else so finishing up on that, I think that, depending on the business, you need to have a business plan where you have an idea, a general idea of capital that's needed, not just for now, but a lot of times, again, alluding to the mowing lawns, a lot of times people won't pay you on time. They say they pay you weekly, biweekly, monthly, and 2 or 3 months later, well, what do you do when that happens? Well, you better have capital to back it up, because the gas still needs to be purchased, or the maintenance on your equipment, or the people that you have helping you. So having a good business plan, I think, is a sound way to get started in the business, and maybe finding a mentor, somebody that has experience as an entrepreneur with some of the pitfalls and some of the, financial challenges that can creep your way. So doing your homework, I think, is critical. Knowing your product or service is also critical. Probably, it's the most important thing, actually. If you have capital and you don't have a strong understanding of what you're presenting, That's a major problem. So I guess the thing that I would say is you don't have to have $10 million depending on what it is. I think that if you're in software and stuff like that, it's probably a limitless amount of money. Alex, you know a lot more about that than I do, but there's certain businesses where there's a certain burn rate that you have to expect and be ready to absorb. But for a lot of businesses, you can kind of find a realm of capital that you need, and I think I would find a mentor. There's a lot of them available online. I know on the Ask Brien show, you can probably reach out to guests and certainly the hosts who have incredible wealth of knowledge as well, and might get some help there. I mean, there's lots of things you can do, but preparation is really key in this before you get started, and being aware that you're going to put in a lot of hours and a lot of days and a lot of time that you weren't necessarily planning for. But the other component is knowing your product or service and knowing it incredibly well, knowing who the competitor is. And if you say, I don't have a competitor, who's your nearest competitor? Who is the thing that, read up on them, find out what they did, find out if it's a price point thing, why are they priced at a certain thing? Do you think you can do something a lot cheaper? Why? Why is it taking them so much more money and you think you can do it for less? You need to put a lot of homework in. And if you want to be successful, those are probably, and from my perspective, the most important things you can do is be prepared.
Wow. Well, we got to take a quick break. You're listening to the Ask Brien radio show on KHTS 1220 and 98.1 FM. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to the Ask Brien radio show on KHTS 1220 and 98.1 FM. Alex, you said you had a question, and then I've been taking it up all the time, so go ahead and ask.
Fantastic. Well, Bill, I'm going to make a statement, a question, and I want to get your opinion of this. You talked a lot about how you have to know the business, understand it, build a good business plan. I make the statement that there's two things that people run into. Whenever they build a business plan, you're an entrepreneur, we always think of everything as the unicorn. We think we're going to have the unicorn. Yes, they did it wrong. You were mentioning, why could you do it cheaper or better? And everybody thinks they're going to do that. And so when you do your business plan, you get in there and you have best intentions, and all of a sudden the numbers don't work, and you go, well, maybe I can do 5% more. Maybe I can save 5% on cost. And you kind of kid yourself, which is the wrong thing to do. So I want to make that statement. Don't start believing your own headlines and kidding yourself. But the question I have for you is that you mentioned know your business really well. So do you find as an entrepreneur that fear of, well, I'm going to teach my number one person everything there is to know about this and they're going to be my biggest competitor? Or do you find it's really important to have those people really understand it and understand that if they do branch out on their own, that's just fair game? How do you feel about that?
Well, I've personally been, first of all, your comment is well said. I think that you're spot on with that. As far as the dealing with people and worrying with, what they're going to do or spin off on their own, I've never been one that's been concerned with it. Usually I'm in a business where the barrier to entry is fairly great. And if somebody thinks they've found a better way and I haven't, I actually, that really doesn't bother me. The other thing that I thought about, and I believe in my soul, is that if you have something that's good, you're going to find competitors. You're going to find people that think, wait a minute, he's done well, but I can step it up a notch or two or 10. And good luck. I typically I applaud people for giving it a try. I'm not looking at things through rose-colored lenses. I think that, a lot of times it's a lot more challenging, much like when you alluded to, gee, I can, make 5% more, I can do this and I can do that. The practical application of that is way different than what you might envision 99% of the time. So I actually try to teach and encourage people to learn as much as they can. I try to empower them. For the key positions, I try my best to hire people that in a perfect world are more talented than I am or a lot more, from an IQ level than myself. That can come in handy. I think that if they have that capability, that's great. And if people think there's a better way to build a mousetrap, terrific. There's plenty of room in the market for competition. And I think that experience, there's nothing like experience But, having said that, there's nothing like somebody that has the energy and my second year of college when I left, I mean, nothing could stop me at that point. But also I was naive. It was, I was pretty much ignorant to the entrepreneurial challenges. I really didn't know all that stuff. But, when you're in school or just coming out of school, you're like, I can do this. Hey, if they can do it, heck, I can do this a lot better. I think it's a fine mix between the two. I think it's having the experience, the knowledge, the education, the awareness is great. And as we get older, we have a lot of that. I mean, all of us, we're beyond PhDs and as far as being entrepreneurs with the time that we put in. But I also think the magic to it is also, even as an older person, is having the enthusiasm, the drive, sometimes they say ignorance is bliss in certain things. And I actually believe in that when it comes to being an entrepreneur. If you knew, as you get older, you know all the pitfalls, right? Our brains are taught to warning, here, there, and everywhere. Well, a lot of college kids, especially, Alex, this is your field, but, with software and all of that, I mean, it's unbelievable what these kids can do and, all the online stuff that's going on. I think that they're very intelligent, but I also think that they have that, that energy, that excitement, that unawareness about how they can fail, and a lot do fail, but they have that. I think that's the magic to the recipe. I really and truly believe that. And so when I talk to people that aren't 20 or 19 or 22, I always tell them, yeah, you have all the experience in the world. You need to mix it with that wonderful thing that we had when we were in school. And that is, I mean, it's not ignorance. It's really just an unaware place to be and say, I know I can do this, and having the energy and the tenacity to get through it. And as we get older, we don't want to do that. We're like, wait a minute, we have families, we have this and we that. Well, if you're going to be an entrepreneur and, you need that to me is the magic recipe.
Well, we've got
spoken like a true capitalist.
Unfortunately, we've come to the end. We only have 30 seconds left. So you listen to the Ask Brien radio show on KHTS 1220 and 98.1 FM. Bill, how can people reach you?
So you can reach me. My email address is, should I give my email address, Peter, or should I give a number?
Well, you only have 15 seconds, so you got to go quick, whatever you want to do.
Okay. Well, I'll give you my email address. It's B for my first name, Bill, Soller, S as in Sam, ALLER, at albanyfarms.com, like New York, farms, plural.com. Happy to answer any and all questions, and I have a lot of experience as an entrepreneur. Happy to help.
Thank you very much. Ask Brien Radio Show, KHTS 1220, 98.1 FM. Over and out.